It's the MyMichelleLive podcast.
MyMichelleLive, Sci Tech Talk, taking the God story to a geeky place. Here's Michelle.
Hello, friends. It is time for science and technology. I love this day of the week, and I love taking this subject on with you. Get ready. You are going to be connected with some pretty hefty tools, man. These are like the creme de la creme power tools for your mind to deal with the cray-cray that's happening around us right now. Yeah, the world is getting absolutely crazy. How do we navigate through propaganda that you're being stuffed with down your gullet, and some of the claims of fake news, some of the real fake news, some of the not so fake news? What is real? What is not? What do we know about the world around us? It's as though we're on the cusp of losing all that we've built in America, all of our freedoms and our grasp on truth. But not you and not me, because today and throughout this week, through every one of our podcasts this week, we're going to be talking about logic and reason. What is it? And what conclusions can it lead us to? What tools can it give us to navigate what we're all experiencing right now?
The process of going from question to a definite answer is at the root of logic. Logic explores arguments for truth. When we walk this pathway from question to answer, we call it reasoning. And logic is the study of sequences of reasoning.
There you go. From Art of the Problem, which we have a link on our podcast. That was from a YouTube channel. A real simple explanation of what logic is. It's that pathway to truth. And that pathway to truth is important because we've kind of created this idea that there's many truths. There's my truth. There's what's true to you. That's what you feel is truth, and your truth is okay. Just leave my truth alone. Oh, well, not in this society. Now it's my truth is okay. And if you don't believe my truth, then you're probably bad. You're probably evil. You're probably a stain on society. You're problematic, and you must be changed. So we have been at odds in our search for what we're comfortable with, what we like to think of as truth. But since man started thinking, started pondering who we are and where we came from, don't you think there has been a bit of a history of a search for, okay, I want to know what's really true. And if that's you, you've come to the right place today. This isn't about just feeding into your belief system and making you feel good. This is about searching for real truth. We've been trying it for quite some time as humans. Listen to this, a brief history of logic from Philosophy Overdose.
In 1740, the Prussian King Frederick the Great wrote, "Philosophers should be the teachers of the world and the teachers of princes. They must think logically, and we must act logically." What it is to think logically has been one of the main concerns of thinkers since the time of the Babylonians. In the 4th century BC, Aristotle turned his attention to the subject and thereby founded the modern discipline of logic. Today we understand logic as the study of argument and the forms they may take. It's widely used in fields from linguistics to cognitive science, but above all, logic is the vital tool without which computing would never have existed.
But something has happened in society where we no longer want to look for truth. We don't want to use science to help us to understand truth. We want to use science to shore up and prove what we think. And that is dangerous. And it's something that has been in our midst for some time. While we have stopped teaching logic quite some time ago in schools, one thing we have been teaching is that, well, maybe science is subjective.
Recent protests at Bryn Mawr College denouncing STEM as the white man's science. We've seen this kind of thing all the time, right? Science denounced as a tool of oppression. These self-styled revolutionaries are channeling the thoughts of Michel Foucault. Professors have been pumping him into young minds for decades, and he was a particularly powerful purveyor of this idea that science is not what it seems, that it's a nefarious conspiracy. People have been promised that the steady application of science and reason could build a better world. But instead, they just watched those tools be used to wage two epically murderous wars. Dethroning of science starts with the rejection of its foundational assumption that humans can understand the external world at all, that humans can even understand themselves.
On the answer to the question, what is human being? This pretension, I think, is something quite impossible.
If we can't actually access the external world, then that makes science just a story, right? An elaborate fiction that we're telling ourselves. And that fiction is continuously revised through history.
This is really good. You should see the whole YouTube presentation. We have a link everywhere you're hearing this. This is Michel Foucault and Science as Oppression, Architects of Woke from Capital Research Center. I think you'll really enjoy the whole presentation, but talking about the way that science has been used as a way to manipulate, as a way to even cause destruction and deaths. Listen.
What you think is science is really the episteme, a vast invisible social grid. You can't smell it or touch it or taste it, but it shapes what you think is true. Foucault says the episteme is the rules of which we are largely unaware, the fundamental codes of culture that establish the empirical orders.
He says at some point there is just one episteme that controls any society, a set regime of truth which operates in the service of the powerful.
Now, you know, in just a few sound bites, we can't get to the meat of everything that really cool YouTube video has to say, but it does present a problem that we see often, that when science is used, it's kind of like that old adage, figures lie, liars figure, so go figure, right? What is truth? It goes back to what is truth. That's where logic comes in. Today, we're going to take on logic. We're going to have a professor of logic come on and give us a little Logic 101, help us to work through a worldview that is based on something that is truer than just what you happen to feel. Because when you really get to the meat of the situation that we're experiencing right now, come on. Is it or is it not true that we really don't know what truth is? And it's making us a little, making things a little cray-cray, right? As I said. Our staff writer, David Summers, wrote and produced his commentary this week. And if you listen to the story, I think you'll find it pretty funny and maybe a little illogical.
A woke fable. The boy or young person who didn't cry wolf. Once upon a time at the Bull Family Sheep Herding Company, the business owner, Tough, was trying to figure out a job that his son, Gully, could handle. Sadly, Gully, an exceedingly woke 20-something, had proven tragically impervious to most forms of employment. When Tough had offered him the job of shearing, Gully claimed it was emotionally traumatic to be engaged in the fleecing of lower classes. When he'd been tasked with leading the sheep out to green pastures, Gully replied that it discriminated against other shades of grass. And when he was asked to bring the herd back to the pen at day's end, Gully contested it was symbolic of oppression to reenact the plight of sending former prisoners back to incarceration. Finally, Tough figured out exactly the job his son could perform. "Son," Tough called, "I have a job for you." "Parental figure," Gully answered disdainfully. "I prefer you not use such gendered language as son when referring to me. From now on, just call me child." That should be easy enough to remember, Tough thought to himself. Anyway, as you probably know, Lucky's field was recently raided by a wolf, and the entire herd was scattered and devoured. We can't afford to have that happen here, or it would put us out of business. Do you know what that would mean? No more food, no more shelter, and no more game console. Gully's eyes opened slightly. I see, he gulped. "So I am asking you to please be on guard against these predators and to cry wolf if you ever see one." Gully paused, almost thoughtfully, before answering. "I don't see anything at this time that would preclude me from carrying out your directive, but you should know that the idea of subjecting myself to your excessive demands makes me feel slightly oppressed." Tough now paused before delivering his answer. "I am so immensely gratified that I haven't overtaxed your precious sensibilities with this humble request. It's so refreshing to have such an enthusiastic partner to help me carry on the family business." Gully shrugged and returned a wearied gaze back to his PlayStation as his father, parental figure, marched out in a huff. Sometime later, Gully lackadaisically glanced up at the monitor to spot a dark figure loping about in pastureland. He hit pause on his game console and meandered down to check things out. As he crept up within feet of the creature, he saw what could only be described as a wolf. But he had to ask to make sure.
You're hearing a little story from our staff writer, David Summers. Now, you'll hear the rest in just a moment, but first, I wanted to take a moment and say a real special thank you to some of the folks that make the MyMichelleLive podcast come to life. And that is Real Bearded Men, where you get a discount for you fellas who have gorgeous beards. Make them gorgeouser. Just go to our website and use the link, get a discount. And also Calitrin. Calitrin is my absolute favorite supplement. It is for extreme weight loss. It's for maintaining weight, and it is a power pack of collagen, which makes you look a lot and feel a lot longer. For me, it really helps me sleep. It helps me with the mind fog so that I can focus and be here for you. So just wanted to say a special thank you to those who are affiliates with MyMichelleLive. All right, let's listen to the rest of the story from our staff writer, David Summers, as we look at logic today. Think of his story and where, logic kind of escapes you and fails you.
Are you a wolf?" Gully stammered. The canine figure's ears turned like weather vanes in the direction of Gully's voice before it stood up on its haunches and pointed a paw at itself in an exaggerated air of surprise. "Who, me? What a terribly speciest thing to suggest! I'll have you know that I've never identified as a wolf in my entire life, and particularly not when I'm walking about where poor, defenseless sheep are known to graze." Then what do you identify as?" Gully questioned. The figure's large dark eyes shifted back and forth quickly. "Why, I identify as a sheepdog." A smart look crept over Gully's face. "Then you're probably unaware that we don't allow sheepdogs in our pastures because they look too much like wolves." "Oh, I see," came the startled response as its eyes once again darted to and fro. You misunderstood me, of course. I merely meant that I identify as a sheep. And, then I referred to you as dog, as in, homeboy." "Oh," Gully's smile evaporated before turning slightly peeved. "Well, you should know that I don't use gendered language, so you'll need to call me a home young person from now on." Agreed, the creature eagerly reassured, noting the kind of individual he was dealing with. And I would love to be a regular part of your herd, maybe like a kind of wild sheep, to frolic and play and to enjoy a meal upon, enjoy a meal with others of my own kind. I just can't wait to sink my teeth into some thick, tender, scrumptious grass. The final word wilted in his mouth. Gully's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Why don't you eat some now, then? Sure, the canine form paused to suppress a gag. I love to eat grass. He bent down and barely nibbled the tips of the bitter weed beneath him, feigning a smile. My goodness, this stuff is tasty. Too bad I'm so full from recently wolfing down a whole field already. A greedy fire lit up his dark eyes in remembrance. Gully's mouth hung open indecisively. The figure glared cunningly. You aren't going to tell me you only take animals who were born sheep, are you? Gully's eyes shot open with surprise and indignation. Oh, absolutely not. Please, come in. Make yourself at home in our pasture. We'd love to have you. I'm sure you'll fit in fine. Thank you, the sheep-wolf replied with a leering grin, whilst mumbling under his breath. It's so nice not having to get dressed up in the old fleece for a change. So the wolf, who claimed to identify as a sheep, prowled boldly towards the naked herd, as the young wokeling wiped a sheen of alarm from his brow. He was so relieved not to be a sheepist.
As we talk about reason, logic, where has it gone? You see it all the time. And now we're wondering if we're at a place now where we must cancel each other because we're not thinking right. According to a new proposal, if a Christian college, for example, doesn't present evolution as fact, teaches the Bible as true history, well, then they shouldn't be accredited. We just have to get rid of them. There is no room for argument. Is that based on logic and reason? Are some of the ways that we're treating each other based on logic and reason? We're going to talk about that. Professor Kenneth Samples is the author of many great books dealing with this very issue. He's a senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe, a philosopher, theologian. Kenneth Richard Samples, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. It's good to talk with you.
You've written many books, God Among Sages, Christianity's Most Dangerous Ideas, 7 Truths That Changed the World, all spectacular books that get you thinking. And it's not just about, hey, this is what you must think, but there's an idea behind that of look through logic and reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that you're right on target because I think we're living at a time where, if we don't like what a person has to say or if they hold a different worldview or a different perspective than ours, we cancel them. Whereas, in a classical sense, if we go back to Plato and Aristotle, the idea is make your case. If you hold a point of view, make your case. Tell us why you think that's reasonable and rational and good. And Christians, of course, picked up on that idea in the history of the faith. We have faith, but it's a reasonable faith, and we believe in arguments. We don't attack people, but we do critique bad ideas. And so I think reason and rationality and logic is a gift of God, and I think it's something that is unfortunately a bit rare in the marketplace of ideas these days.
So as we talk today, this isn't about Christian indoctrination or trying to prove that what you believe is the only way to believe. Beyond that, you have to start somewhere. And I think that's what we're both getting at, is you have to start somewhere. You have to start in your head. logically going through what is happening around us, digesting what's happening around us, and putting it in perspective. And that's where logic and reason come into play. The problem, though, is that we have become a society that's more given to rhetoric, feelings, and is that born out of moral relativism?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because, again, if we go back to the classical world, Socrates ran into that in ancient Athens 500 years before the birth of Christ. There were people called the sophists, and they were very good at making the worse argument appear the better, and they relied on rhetoric, but what was absent is argument. And an argument in logic is a very simple thing. You make a claim, and then you seek to back up the claim. So your claim is your conclusion. The support are called the premises. Or put very simply, Michelle, an argument is a supported opinion. And so I think we are experiencing kind of a moving forth of relativistic ideas. And it's important that people in the public sphere like you and like myself and others that, we convey to people we have very important ideas, but we think we have a good basis for believing in them.
Okay. I want to get to some of the faith issues a little bit later. Right now, though, diversity of ideas is becoming taboo. Prevailing ideas kind of demand allegiance, and there is no room for question. And we're seeing that played out in the public square with everything from the coronavirus to areas of faith, religious, and political ideas. There's just no end to it, and it almost seems like we're on the verge of a civil war because of this clash. People have lost jobs. We've been canceled on social media. This is taking place. Is there room in the world of logic for this kind of behavior? And where is logic in our society today?
Yeah, well, I think you paint a realistic picture. The university, as we thought about it, it used to be called a classical liberal education. And what that meant was you had a very strong sense of free speech. People had to make their case and defend their case, but the university allowed for freedom of differing ideas. And so the idea was, let that controversial person come and make their case, but then they're going to be critiqued. And I think the reality, the benefit of that classical tradition of free speech, debating, going back and forth, is that we need that. To discover truth, we need diverse positions that are evaluated and critiqued. And simply eliminating that, I think we've lost the university system if that's taken away. And tolerance implies differences. Tolerance recognizes that people take differing points of view, and that classical sense is to say, look, I'm not going to attack you. I respect you as a person. You have dignity and value. In fact, my theological views is you're made in the image of God. But you have to back up your claim, and if you can't, then you have to consider other things. And so logic is critical, Michelle. I think it is absolutely an indispensable tool in helping us to discover truth. And I share with you the concerns about our culture.
Is it seemingly more difficult then to separate someone's ideas and beliefs from the person? I hear you say, I'm not going to attack you. I'm going to, debate your ideas, your beliefs, the things that you're expounding on. but I don't think I mean, it's hard for all of us. Okay, I read one of your postings from Reasons to Believe. I should put a link to it. And of course it caught my eye because I'm kind of geeky. And it was from 2012, Marvel Comics and Logical Fallacies. And I love that you said, you know, as we're sitting around, and I've been to the headquarters at Reasons to Believe. I didn't get to meet you face to face. I'm so bummed. But they had this great spread of food. And I got to sit around with all of the scholars there and talk about really cool things. And I get this picture as you guys are all sitting around the table there talking about who's the coolest Marvel comic, right? All these brilliant scientific minds. That's what you're talking about in your spare time there. But what I loved is that you said, you know, we all have the tendency to hulk out when someone challenges our irrefutable beliefs. All of us do.
Yeah.
We all hulk out. You hulk out. We all do.
Yeah. I think, Michelle, that there is a real tendency, and I think sometimes as we grow older, to only want to hear people who kind of support our viewpoint. And there is what is called confirmation bias. That's simply the idea that we tend to go looking for support of our view and kind of conveniently ignore things that go against our perspective. I know that's part of the human condition. And, when it comes to controversial issues like politics, there's an easy tendency, hey, I'm comfortable listening to that person, but the other person makes me feel uneasy. He or she's raising questions that I feel a little tense about. But you know what, Michelle, I actually try to listen to people who have differing views because I want to, hey, if I've missed something, I want to hear what is, and this is what I often tell my students. You know, if you're writing a paper, at the end of your paper, tell me what the best argument is on the other side and how you would respond to it. And I think that is a classical education. That's what our young kids need in public schools. It's what everybody should receive in a good high school education. And when you go to the university, your ideas should be challenged. And, you know, it is easy, you know, maybe some of the scholars will differ with my view, and I might want to take that personally. But in reality, if somebody can correct my views and I can come to a clearer view of what's real and true and good, then they've done me a service. But unfortunately, we now live at a time where that free speech, that challenge is absent.
We are in a kind of a dangerous mode as well as we look at what's happening in the world around us, and there is no logic in the debate. It really comes down to tearing people down, going for the jugular. We've stopped teaching logic in schools. And I just wanted to ask you, just for fun, let's just imagine for a moment if logic was no longer allowed in the realm of science, what would science look like?
Wow, it would be devastating. I mean, you look at fields like, you know, philosophy, and you look at fields like science. The attempt is to develop a hypothesis and then try to test it, try to falsify it. You know, one of the presuppositions, Michelle, of logic, of science, is that our cognitive faculties and our sensory organs, that's our brain and our eyes and our senses, that they're reliable, and that logic and mathematics are reliable. So you really couldn't do science without accepting the reliability of logic and math. And yet there are people, I mean, when it gets down to issues today, like debates over vaccinations and things like that, you have at times people who kind of step back from those issues. So, you know, logic is such a critical discipline. Again, it gives us that objective. A good education that is a challenging education that will prepare you to face the world and to succeed in the world, is when you don't hear just one voice, you hear multiple voices, and you have a dialogue rather than a monologue. And
logic demands it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember the regimes in some of the other countries of communism where you have one voice. What has made America a great nation, and the reason why people still want to come to America, is there is that capacity to examine ideas and reason through them. So reason is a good gift from God, and it's a powerful tool in your life.
Why have we stopped teaching logic in schools?
Well, it's a great question. I'll tell you this, Michelle. I've been teaching logic for, I guess it's now 31 years, and my first class was in 1990. And of all the classes I've taught world religions, I've taught introduction to philosophy, I've taught ethics, comparative religions. The one class where students come back to me again and again over that 31-year period is they say, Professor Samples, logic, it empowers me. It has given me a capacity I didn't know that I had. I can take ideas and I can look at the arguments and I can evaluate them. And I just love it when the students tell me that logic is such a critical class to them. And I don't know why we don't teach it right from the get-go. I don't know why we don't introduce these ideas even in elementary school, develop them into the middle school, and then require students in high school to take logic classes, maybe speech classes where they debate. These are critical skills, and the founding fathers of our great nation, they thought that kind of education was critical. It would help you to earn a living, it would help you to be a citizen, and it would help you to discern questions, the big questions of truth. So we need to return to it, and I think people need to, if I were to educate my children all over again, if my kids were young now, boy, I'd be thinking very carefully about how can I expose them to the very best education. And logic is such a critical class, and I don't know why we don't teach it at a much earlier place in our institutions.
Well, I'll give you my theory. I think that it seems a lot more rewarding for some to teach kids what to think rather than how to think. And then we've devolved into, instead of teaching kids what to think, we teach them what to feel. And that gets us even farther away from logic. We don't need to indoctrinate kids, as we started this conversation, into our faith and say, you must think like this. What you do is you teach your kids logic, and they can come to a logical conclusion, which inevitably, in my opinion, leads to the God story. Before we get to that God story with Professor Kenneth Samples of Reasons to Believe, I wanted to talk a bit about logic. Since it's not taught in schools, this can be a really fun conversation if we can delve into what some of the logical fallacies are and what are some of the real examples of those fallacies in the world around us.
Yeah, let me throw out this, just a critical definition of logic.
Okay.
Logic is the study of reason, rationality, and arguments. And so arguments are very important. And an argument isn't, again, something that happens between, your spouse and you, or between your brother or sister or your parents. You can be reasoning and arguing without your jugular vein popping out or anything like that. It's to make a claim and then seek to support the claim. And arguments break down, Michelle, and that's what we mean by fallacies. There's an error or a mistake in the reasoning process. And I'll give you a couple of good examples. If you present an argument to me, maybe about abortion or maybe about traditional marriage or any one of these controversial issues, And you make your case. You say, hey, here is the reasons why I think this view is valid, why it's reasonable. And I come back to you and I ignore your argument and I attack your character. Well, we call that the ad hominem. Hominem is the Latin for man or person. Mm-hmm. Well, an ad hominem is a deep fallacy because I've ignored your argument and I've attacked your character. So anything I say to you is irrelevant because I've never really gotten into to the argument. Here's another fallacy. It's called the ad populum. Mm-hmm. Where people go by sentiment. Everybody is doing it. I'll tell you a very quick story.
Okay.
Very quick story. In Nazi Germany, Albert Speer, who was Hitler's architect and became the Minister of Armaments and Munitions, Churchill later said that Speer was the most important Nazi because he probably made World War II last a couple years longer than it should have. Well, Albert Speer said he joined the Nazi Party not because he had investigated National Socialism and read Mein Kampf and read Nazi philosophy. He said he got caught up into it. He said all of his students were joining, and he said, I joined it because everybody's doing it. You can see how people make mistakes in reason. And if that could happen to Albert Speer, it could happen to us.
Is it happening to us?
Discerning. Well, I think it is happening to us. I think people make mistakes in reasoning, and they don't seriously challenge these kinds of things. If I were the president of a university, I would allow very controversial views to be presented, and I would just tell them, but when you're done, we're going to critique your view. We're going to take it apart, and we're going to take a look at it. I certainly would not. I think, Michelle, I think a college education should make you feel uncomfortable. That's the way you grow. That's the way you learn. And
wait a minute. I'm sorry. I got to stop you there. What about our puppy places and safe zones and coloring books and cocos when someone has a differing opinion? I mean, how do we get past that?
Well, I loved what you said when you said we don't tell people what to think. We teach them how to think. I mean, what a learning education. And this should happen not just in our universities. It should happen in our churches where people can learn to develop an independent judgment. Thank you.
Yes.
There are times where you are going to feel, there are times where you are going to be uncomfortable and you're going to hear things that are going to make you uncomfortable. But the classical world and the Christian church has always thought that's a very good place. You can discover truth when you have the skills to reason through and work through these issues.
Okay, so let's make some people uncomfortable. I'm ready for this. In the church, there is a lot of illogical fallacies that run amok, that destroy people. We have cultivated a people who are unchurched and dechurched, mostly because of some of those things you run up against. The kind of a bullying theology that if you don't think like me, well, then, you don't love God. You're not really a Christian. You're not living your life the way you should. We like to become legalistic and play the Holy Spirit in other people's lives, tell people what they should think, how they should live. And we use the Bible as this authority to do so. But don't we also use fallacies, logical fallacies, bringing them up to our side when we really don't need to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Christians at times engage in conspiracy theories. And again, I think there are reasons that happen. Christians believe there is an invisible, malevolent hand behind the universe, so they're a little suspicious. And sometimes our eschatology makes us feel untrusting of government, and there are certainly reasons to question the government at times. But yeah, I think that we've been talking about the lack of logic in the universities. We need pastors to teach their congregations how to reason, how to think in a worldviewish manner. And I think we also need to return to that idea, Michelle, that we're tolerant and intolerant, always tolerant of people. All people are made in the image of God, regardless of their color, regardless of their sex, regardless of their financial status, where they've come from in the world. When Paul says there's no difference between Jew, Gentile,
slave free,
male and female, all are one in Christ. That's a revolutionary statement. But we also need to then teach them, hey, look, I'm going to treat people respectfully because that's part of the creation mandate, but I'm going to critique hard the argument. To accept a bad argument, to accept something that is false, that has deep negative repercussions. So this return, and I'll use the word for Christians if they're uncomfortable with the word logic. How about the word discernment?
Okay, there you
we're
go.
told, test all things, hold on to the good. We're told the Bereans were more noble than the Thessalonians. Why? Because they tested. So there is an intellectual virtues that are taught in Scripture that I think our church needs to return to.
I'd like to take on some of the logic of a biblical worldview as we talk about the world around us and some of the big issues that we're faced with every day. The logical standing of a biblical worldview and why it may be important to include instead of disclude from the discourse.
That's why I think people have always been attracted to America. This idea that, we can, God has given us the capacity to think and reason. And again, I would return, Michelle, to this idea that you don't want a monologue. You want a dialogue. You want to hear differing perspectives. And by the way, if I could offer, my own opinion, I think there are times where Christians rely too much on the idea that the courts are going to decide in our favor. So don't get me wrong. I think Christians have an obligation to vote. I think they have an obligation to discern what are the best candidates, who shares their values, to protect life, all of these things. But I also think that we need to be involved and to convey the idea of why we value traditional marriage, why marriage between one man and one woman, a life commitment. I think we need to influence people, not just in the voting booth, not just on the court level. We need to try to live our values. And, those are challenging things. I mean, the church has always been in a place. Sometimes the church is advancing, influencing the culture. You look in church history, there are times where the church seems to be retreating, and ideas are challenging it. So, it's a tough time right now, but I think Christians who want to influence culture, they should vote for good candidates and serve in their civic responsibility. But I think Christians also need to have a witness. And it doesn't help when divorce rate in the church competes with the world. It doesn't help when we have children born out of wedlock at a high rate. So we need to try to live that faith as well as voting for people we think
live that faith and be
our values.
Upfront about the faith and even about our failings. We're going to fail because we're humans, but we like to set ourselves up as though we're the ascended as well. We see that in our culture, where we have a lot of technocracy, where we have these technocrats that know better, but we do that in the church as well. And I'm all for calling out that hypocrisy as well. We've seen good people who have done horrific things. We've seen that with the Ravi Zacharias issue. We've seen that with some of the things that are coming against people like Dave Ramsey. You know, not everyone's perfect. And the best thing to do is say, yeah, I'm not perfect. And I'll be the first to volunteer myself for that. I suck. But God doesn't. He's amazing. My thing is, though, that we have got to be in a place where we are transparent, where we're real. And logic does bring us there. And there is some, and I wanted to maybe end our conversation as we come to the end of our time together with some specific ideas from the Bible that fit in to a logical argument that people can take home from today and go, okay, I need to maybe think about this.
Yeah, no, I like your idea of the transparent. I think that's such a critical idea. Yeah, from a biblical point of view, remember that a lot of the great logicians in history, Michelle, were Christians. And they believed in reason, rationality, argument, the laws of logic, because they believed that those came from the mind of God. And from a biblical point of view, Paul, the apostle, in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, there are different prophets at the church, and he says, test all things and hold on to that which is good. John, the apostle, in 1 John says, test the spirits. Be cautious, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Again, Luke says the Bereans were more noble than the Thessalonians. Why? Because Paul was preaching, and those Hebrew Christians were opening the old, what they called, the Old Testament, and they were testing. So putting ideas to the test and looking very carefully at them and looking at the evidence, I think is part of it's part of the intellectual virtues. Just as there are moral virtues in Scripture, be faithful to your spouse, don't lie, don't steal. There are also intellectual virtues of being discerning, being careful, putting things to the test. I think those are logical principles. Those ideas are not just biblical, they're also philosophical and scientific and logical.
I think that the important thing for me personally, and as I talk to you, our listener, thinking about what I believe, you may know me and you may know that I'm the faith girl. Okay, that's cool. But I'm more than just a blind faith girl, Ken. I really want to know what I believe is true, and I'm okay questioning it. If the claims of Jesus dying on the cross are absolutely outlandish, like a fable, then I want to know that. I want to look at the historical records. I want to look at eyewitnesses. I want to look at reliable reports. That's kind of why I think we took this on in the science realm, because in science, you delve into things, you poke it and prod it. We are getting away from that in science, Ken, where we're actually using terms like settled science and science deniers. There is no such thing. Science must be tested. It must be poked. It must be prodded. And if you don't believe that, then you are giving into your own logical fallacy and not allowing yourself the idea that maybe what you believe isn't true, and maybe someone has something valuable to say to add to your worldview. I'll give you the final word.
I completely agree. I think that, I think the scientific community, there are times where, the decided perspective kind of weighs heavily and not everybody is given a place at the table. But that goes against, as you've correctly noted, that scientific investigation. And I return to the point you made. It's a great one. It's one I try to practice, and that is when I'm teaching people, I'm aware there are always ideas I'm going to be giving them, but I want to teach them how to think, not tell them what to think. And in the Scriptures, Jesus and the apostles, they invite people to test the truth claims of Christianity and see if they hold up.
Well, that doesn't sound like a very religious practice. I think that goes against the idea of religion in some ways. But what you're talking about is true. And you've mentioned it through this whole interview that the Bible says, but essentially, now this is Michelle paraphrasing, so give me some leeway here, Ken. God is essentially saying, you want a question? Come on, bring it on.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
I appreciate you joining me today and setting aside this time. I think it's a very important conversation to have, and I'm glad that you could come on and challenge us to maybe abandon the feeling, and my heart believes it's like this Disney philosophy that's taken over the world, right? Follow your heart, and I just want to sing with birds chirping around my head. But maybe it's time for us to abandon that and look for a little more logic and a little more reason. See where that takes you. For me, it takes me to the God story. Professor Kenneth Samples, he's an author and senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe.
Reasons to Believe.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
Very good, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate you being with us today.
I'm happy to do it.
And I'm happy that you've been listening today. If you have questions about logic and reason and where in my world it's come to a God story, hey, I'll talk it over with you. Just find us at MyMichelleLive.com. Like us, please. Like us, share us. We're kind of in our infancy here on the web and in podcasting, so we need you to be part of the family. Get the God story out there. If you like it, support us and support even our affiliates. Hey, we'll catch you tomorrow.
More SciTech Talk at MyMichelleLive.com.